Welcome back to this lecture series on social issues by To the Point. So, in this article, we'll be talking about a couple of tribal movements in India which have been the landmark events in the struggle of tribals, especially in the post independent India. So, this is the focus of the present video. Post independent tribal issues. So, the two most significant events we will be discussing in this tribal movements in the post-independent era, but it does not mean by any standard that these are the only movements. What we will actually notice is the common features associated with the social movements of tribals, and the reasons are pretty common. And we will be looking at these two couple of social movements that we are talking about. Let us have a look at them in this lecture series. So the first point that we have to ask is, what is the meaning of a tribal? Generally, tribes are those group of people or a community. So this is the first point. It is about a community which has certain characteristic features. What are those characteristic features? The first one is that they have similar ancestors. The second point that we have to consider is the fact that they have similar customs and traditions. So naturally, depending on the geography of that region, each tribe has a different set of customs and traditions, and these customs and traditions are pretty different from the normal society that most of the people live in. So for this reason, the vulnerability of these tribal customs and the culture of these tribes has been recognized as a flashpoint in our politics as well. Even after so many years of independence, even after so much of economic development, we still have a lot of Dalits, or Adivasis as tribals are generally called. They are left out from the developmental processes because of their backwardness. They don't have access or affordability issues. And actually, if you take a look at the population numbers, they have tripled since 1947. So naturally, there will be a lot of pressure on the lives of tribals as well, because they will have to share the same amount of land that they have been using traditionally. So land resources is a problem, and access to the forests, where in the present mode of development, tribals are witnessing their forest spaces being encroached by governments. So how do we deal with this problem is the question. Naturally, when your very basis of existence is questioned, there will be social movements against such unbalanced mode of development. What happened is, because of this reason, firstly, they lost their home. Secondly, they don't know anything else apart from living in harmony with the forest. So they don't have the prerequisite training or jobs to survive. So this again led to a feeling of frustration, and because the outsiders who were coming into their lands were occupying their lands, they felt a cultural shock as well as a sense of insecurity. All this has resulted in a unbalanced developmental models in our country. All this culminated into the social movements of tribals. So these are the reasons, and this is the definition of tribes. So if we take a look at the categorization in sociology, there are various types of movements depending on the reasons. First reason is because of the exploitation of outsiders. Then again, you have some economic deprivation as well, like certain tribal movements like the Gonds in Madhya Pradesh and Mahas in Andhra Pradesh. They took to this social movement or social route because they wanted some economic resources for their own development. The next one has certain separatist tendencies because they felt a complete alienation because of the cultural imposition or the clash of cultures in their region, especially Nagas and Mizos. So we'll be looking at these factors in the case studies that we'll be looking at. So this types and the reasons is extremely important for you to understand. So the first movement that we're talking about is the Jharkhand movement. So what is this Jharkhand movement, which is a state in India? Let us have a look. During the time of independence, Jharkhand had a very spectacular leader in the name of Birsa Munda. He was an Adivasi who led major uprisings against the British. Again, the reason for such movements is because outsiders used to dominate the region and take away their rights. But after his death, he became a very important icon of the movement. And in the memory of his struggle, there was also a lot of literature which kind of made him an immortal in the cultural history of Jharkhand. So, taking inspiration from his activities during the independence time, literate Adivasis began to research and write about their history and myths. So they wanted to document all that information, and in this course of events, a sort of a rational attitude and the kind of realization that they are not getting the kind of economic and other benefits that other parts of the state are getting, and this is when actually these people realize that there is definitely something wrong with the kind of developmental model, and they have to strongly assert for their rights. So that is the genesis or the background of this Jharkhand movement. So middle class Adivasi intellectual leadership, that is the first generation of those people who were educated in the post independent era, they mobilized support for this movement, not just in India but outside India also. So if you take a look at the cultural map of Bihar from which Jharkhand was actually extracted, or the Adivasis who shared a common hatred of Dikus are found. So the region is South Bihar. Who are these Dikus? They are migrant traders. They used to lend money, and when this vicious cycle of debt has actually robbed them of their land, that is when these tribals realized that the kind of economic model that they're stuck in would eventually lead them into a state of poverty. So these Dikus actually grabbed the wealth, and the original residents of the land were completely impoverished. Also, this region has something called resource curse. That is, if you take a look at the geological map of India, you would notice that central India and Jharkhand especially has vast amount of mineral wealth. Despite having this mineral wealth and mining and industrial projects, it suffered from a phenomenon called resource curse, where there is development, where there are plenty of resources, yet the people of the region remain backward. So it basically means that money was flowing out of the state and the region. It is actually not witnessing the kind of development it deserves. So, coming to the actual movement and the genesis or the evolution of the movement for a separate state of Jharkhand, this dates way back to 1955 itself, when the State Reorganization Commission was organizing the states on linguistic basis. Originally, Jharkhand demanded a separate statehood status, but it was denied by the commission. Who was the leader? Jaipal Singh Munda. Please remember this name for your objective questions. This was rejected by the commission, and in 1972, there were two different organizations that brought this movement again into the public scenario. One is the Jharkhand Mukti Morcha, and the other one is the All Jharkhand Students Union. An important leader of the movement is Nirmal Mahto, who was also the founder of All Jharkhand Student Union. So this person and the organization actually took a violent route which was opposed by Jharkhand Mukti Morcha. So this entire struggle has actually culminated into the grant of a Jharkhand Area Autonomous Council status. That is, nearly 40 subjects were handed over to this autonomous council, and developmental funds were given to the region to satisfy the demands of the people of that region. So what is the ultimate result of this campaign? The Bihar Reorganization Bill came into the picture in the year 2000, and Jharkhand was carved out of the erstwhile state of Bihar. The second famous movement that we have to talk about is the Naga Rebellion. So this Nagas issues was a very historic one, right from 1900s itself. So we'll be talking about the post-independent struggle of the people of these region. The peculiar feature of Nagas is that they were indulging in head hunting. So this practice of their tribe was the reason why a lot of enemies were very skeptical about entering into their territory, and this included even the British. So they used a different methodology to interact with the locals. They introduced Christianity and education to the Nagas. So when we're talking about Nagaland or Nagas, we tend to imagine them as a homogeneous entity, but in reality, they have 30 different tribes amongst them, and there is a constant state of conflict there. There is rich culture associated with each of those tribes, and they have their own traditions. So when you're talking about a Naga national movement, it's a consequence of various factors. One is ethnicity, geography, history, and most importantly, it is the Mongoloid race under the Tibeto-Burman category, which kind of gives them a homogeneous sense of belonging. They have certain customs and traditions which are very different from the people living in the plains. So, as a result of this, there is a constant state of conflict in the region. The consequence of this Naga movement is the fact that uh, from the initial days itself, the civilization of Nagas was definitely away from the mainstream society. On one hand, we had the creation of India as a nation, and Nagaland became a part of the country. And at the same time, the conflict of this civilization, that is the cultures, that has been a reality. So it was very unpleasant at that time. And in order to protect their indigenous culture, the Nagas demanded that they completely move away from India. So the Nationalist Socialist Council of Nagaland that led the movement was the body that was responsible behind creating a support base for a sovereign state, and it mobilized all the Naga forces in various Naga inhabited areas of northeast of India. Also, you have northern Burma or the present day Myanmar, where this organization was equally famous. So the people of this area came together and proposed something called Nagalim, that is a separate country of Nagalim. And the unification of all Naga tribes under one administration and liberating Nagalim from India was one of the objectives of this organization. Its manifesto is based on the principle of socialism for economic development. But when you talk about the value system that they possess, it is the Baptist Christian religious outlook. However, most of these demands were met from time to time when in 1963 itself, the state of Nagaland was created with just three districts. Over a period of time, these three districts became 12 districts as of 2019. So there was a democratic decentralization and a recognition of the principle of democracy, where the aspirations of the people was respected. Thus, we have to understand that both Nagaland movement as well as the Jharkhand movement is basically about tribals trying to express their potential. So there is a feeling of relative deprivation. This feeling of relative deprivation should be contained to, keep the unity and integrity of the nation intact. That is the lesson we have learned. Therefore, inclusive growth. This should be the guiding forces to avoid any such unpleasant social moments in the near future. So that is the lesson we have to take. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. So that's it for now. Thank you.